agenda item tonight. We have a presentation by Ray McConnor, the Director of Personnel for the Town of Webster, on the Employee Handbook update. So I'm going to hand it to
All right, thank you. Joining me tonight is Senior Personnel Clerk Kelsey Feeney. Kelsey has joined us from the town of Greece and will be taking over payroll responsibilities on Carol Capitello's retirement in January. Kelsey was also our project manager on this review. So our presentation tonight has 4 components. Background, we're going to talk about the history, purpose, and certain disclaimers with the employee handbook. We're going to talk about the process that we went through to complete this. We retained an HR consultant, we researched and reviewed drafts, and designated Kelsey as our project manager, collaborative department heads, and made multiple drafts for quality review. Then we're going to actually review with you all the changes, proposed changes to the employee handbook, and then talk about the next steps of what will happen after tonight. So, history. We were able to locate the oldest version of the employee handbook from 1994. The current version that we are using was adopted by the town board in 2007. I think it goes without saying that many laws and procedures have changed in the past 15 years. There were attempts made in 2013, 2015, and 2019 to update the employee handbook, but none of those attempts made it to the town board for your consideration or adoption. We're hoping to change that in 2022 and turn that yellow circle into a nice green circle. So, what's the purpose? The purpose of an employee handbook is to establish rules and policies for all employees of the town. It is to be read in conjunction with union contracts for those employees who are in the union. So unless expressly excluded therein, the employee handbook is applicable to all employees except when in conflict with an expressed or explicit provision of a collective bargaining agreement, police general order, or Webster Public Library Board of Trustee adopted policy, in which case the latter shall supersede. In general, a good employee handbook ensures that rules and policies are accurate and up to date, that they're known by all, managers, employees, and the officials of the town. They're clear and understood, consistently and fairly applied, and documented for compliance purposes. So, some disclaimers. The employee handbook is not a contract of employment, express or implied. It should not be construed as such. Unless otherwise specified, the handbook supersedes and replaces any and all previous personnel policies, manuals, guidelines, or related resolutions issued by the town. The town board reserves the right to interpret, change, modify, or eliminate any provision contained in the handbook. And in the event a federal or state statute or a town law or ordinance should conflict with any provision contained in the handbook, the statute, law, or ordinance will prevail. So, what do we do on the process? We started in June of this year, and we retained a firm called Public Sector HR Consultants. They had built our 2007 version of the employee handbook and were involved in other draft updates. They work exclusively with municipalities in New York and are used by many area towns and counties. We designated project manager. We reviewed all prior drafts, looking at 13, 15, and 19 drafts. We researched samples from other towns. We developed areas of focus for the consultant to provide us with maybe some best practices that they've seen. We went through multiple drafts. We followed up on changes, and we did a quality assurance review for typographical errors and language agreements. We engaged our department heads on specific policy questions to make sure that we could compare our current practices versus the 2007 handbook, and in some areas, we looked to them for their expertise. So, for instance, IT policies. We worked extensively with the IT department to make sure that the employee handbook policies were in line there, and certain finance policies, and worked with upstairs to discuss tools and vehicles and such. We briefed the supervisor and finance director on the process. We've made notification to department heads so they would know about tonight's meeting, as well as notification to all union presidents so that they would know about our intention here and we're presenting to the town board. So overall, there are around 150 changes to the employee handbook, 10 new policies, 25 policies have been updated. So the main category of changes are new policies, updated policies for legal compliance, and then best practice recommendations. And we'll go through each of those three sections here. So for our new policies, background investigations, this was a formalization of our current practices. We do run background checks on new hires, but there was not a written policy, so now there is. Employment of relatives. This is something that was identified in prior drafts but never adopted, and this sets down rules that avoid supervisory situations that can cause conflict of interest, but also recognizes that people can be hired off of civil service lists and there can be a history, a family tradition of service. So the example I point to is that sometimes law enforcement can be a family tradition, fire departments, other forms of service. So it does have provisions for that. Nepotism, basically it makes clear that using your position to favor a family member is misconduct. Additional new policies on the use of communication systems and equipment, social media, and bring your own device. Basically, in the last 15 years, the area of IT has grown as to what are the technology tools that we're using, and this brings in some policies that were sorely needed. New policy on leave for blood donation and time off to vote. These are New York State laws. The town has been complying with them. We've always been in compliance with them, but we did not have them in our policy handbook, and so we're doing that. A press policy. Basically, this clarifies that employees should not be speaking directly to the press. They should be notifying the department heads. The department heads should be informing the town's supervisor so that there can be consistent information and accurate information given to the public, and so that the people who need to know the information and the concerns of the public can get it directly. And then finally, whistleblower law is in compliance with Section 75B of Civil Service Law. This is something the town has complied with but did not have in its employee handbook. So our next section is updates for legal compliance. Kelsey, would you like to talk about that section of the work?
Yep, so the first update that we made was in regards to gifts, receiving gifts. So the limit was previously set at $25 and it increased to $75 due to inflation. The second update deals with New York State law breaks for nursing mothers. This law mandates that us as employers give those individuals, employees at work who are breastfeeding the ability to do so at work, gives them special time periods to do it, as well as certain places to do it, such as, we can't step into the bathroom to do that. The third policy, so currently the employee handbook states that town employees can use town equipment and tools for their own personal use. Brayden and I would like to eliminate this policy as it is unethical and leads to unconstitutional gifts of funds. The next update deals with military leave laws, and these were updated due to federal and state law requirement changes. The next update dealt with New York State cancer screening laws. This law mandates that us as employers give the employees the ability to take up to 4 hours per calendar year of cancer screening leave if they choose to do so. The FMLA policy update was just updated to new federal requirements. Most of these changes had to do with military caregivers. The COBRA policy update was updated due to new New York State regulations. The EEO policy and the ADA policy were updated due to new federal law requirements. And last but not least, the non-discrimination policy was also updated to comply with new New York State law requirements. And then our next section is about our best practice recommendations, and Brayden's going to speak on those.
All right. So there's 2 slides on this, and they go basically in page order through the handbook. We included a definition of benefited part-time employees. The town has had a history of providing some benefits for certain part-timers, but it was kind of a conglomeration of inconsistent practices and some conflicting board resolutions. So that is now defined in here and is consistent with the direction that we issued earlier this year to managers. All right, so the next is that we are putting in the handbook that for new hires that they should receive a performance evaluation at 6 months. We consider that to be a best practice. That is not tied to salary progression, so there's not a cost element to that, but it is forcing and reminding managers that it's really important to have those performance conversations with new hires relatively early in the process and not wait until the 364th day. We incorporated existing finance department travel policy into the handbook. That's a separate policy that exists, and so now it's incorporated into the handbook. We did some updates around the vehicle use. So for instance, there's a chart in the handbook of vehicle assignments, and it was out of date with regard to employee job titles and which employees had 24-hour use, which employees had commuter use or pool use. And we've also reviewed what the appropriate tax treatment is for that. And so when this is adopted and coming into the new year, we'll be adjusting tax treatment to be consistent with IRS requirements. We also simplified the language around vehicle use. There were some vehicles that could be driven in contiguous counties and some that could not. And it was based on job title, not based upon the assignment of the vehicle. And so we thought it made sense to simplify that. Kind of continuing along in the vehicle section, we included insurability standards within the document. So it talks about vehicle assignment based on driving record. So if you had a DWI in the last 3 years, we're not going to assign a vehicle to you, for instance. And also it formalized something that we've been doing for a long time, which is we use the New York State DMV lens system for all people who are assigned vehicles for the town. And that notifies us if they have a reportable incident so that we can check their license status. But that was not contained in any of the written policies, so it is to be added here. Let's see, updating our policy to clarify compensatory time for FLSA non-exempts. So compensatory time for people who can earn overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act is contained in the union contracts, but for any non-union employees who are hourly versus salaried, this gives them the option to choose time off instead of causing an additional expense to the town in overtime. There's a section of the employee handbook, section 800, that says basically for department heads which union contract they derive their benefits from. Okay? And so there was a mishmash of some department heads were drawn from blue collar and some from white collar, and our practice in doing our hiring over the last number of years, there's some inconsistency in benefit treatment. And so we're proposing that all department heads follow the white collar contract with the exception of the chief and the captain because of the really uniqueness of pay practices and benefit practices around law enforcement. So that's our recommendation there. The last one on this slide is clarifying the holiday treatment for benefited part-timers. It goes back to my earlier conversation about part-time benefits not being well defined. This defines them. Next slide, we are making a recommendation around an existing paragraph called credit for prior service. And so the point of this change is to recognize the value of prior service at other municipalities. Quite a few of the folks that we've hired recently, we hired them because they had experience at other municipalities, and that was valuable to us. And so we want to basically be able to treat them as an experienced employee instead of as a brand new employee. And so we would like some consistency with that. That's the recommendation there. Clarifying vacation treatment of benefited part-timers. That's another aspect of clarifying the benefit of part-timers. Health insurance, recommendations on health insurance. The health insurance policy had not been updated since before the passage of Obamacare, and there were still contingencies in there for insurance for part-time employees, which we don't do. And so that all those references are removed, and also this board has has said that part-time elected officials, other than some grandfathered folks, don't receive health insurance, and so that's been cleaned out in the draft. And then there were certain grandfathering language that applied solely to some old town supervisors that's no longer needed, and so that's cleared out as well. One of the more substantial changes in the employee handbook has to do with short-term disability. So since the time the handbook was adopted, the town has opted out of New York State statutory short-term disability. We did that about 10 years ago. Instead, the town self-funds for a disability benefit, but the employee handbook didn't define what that benefit was because it was written when we were under the statutory benefit. So we've proposed a level in there for part-timers to basically follow the statutory, and then for full-timers, we're proposing that they have access to half-pay sick leave, which is a very common disability replacement benefit for municipalities in New York. I would point out that for our unionized employees, our white collar and blue collar, that they have access to a sick bank, which allows them to receive full pay for that time period. And currently, our full-time non-union employees will be limited to $170 a week. And so the proposal is to allow them to have half-pay sick leave for up to 6 months. So as we close out here, the town has long had a fitness center membership benefit for employees, but it was never incorporated into the handbook, so that benefit is incorporated into the handbook. And we are also around drug-free workplace. We're incorporating our existing pre-employment drug testing practices into the handbook, but also making an important modification along our with regard to marijuana use. Right? So drug-free workplace policies have historically said that you cannot use any illegal drug while at work or on work premises or with work equipment. In New York State, marijuana is legal, but employers can set their own rules with regard to workplace use. And so this clarifies what we had when the law passed, we set instructions to employees that what they do on their time is their business, but they can't do it on our time. They can't impact their performance on our time. They can't do it on our property. They can't do it with our equipment. This codifies that. And I would just say that anyone who has a CDL license that operates large equipment, they have always and continue to be covered by federal rules, and marijuana use is not allowed for them, so the public can even be comfortable that folks who are operating our CDL-based equipment are subject to random drug testing and are not allowed to use marijuana. So, the board members, you've been provided with a track change version of the 150-page employee handbook, because you know, the devil could be in the details, and there's a bug. Okay, so all right. So next steps. So tonight we briefed the town board. Next week I'll prepare a final draft based on the input from board members or department heads, or you know, typos or something we find. And then I'll distribute a final draft a week from Monday for the anticipated adoption by the board on November 17th. We would then engage in an extensive education program to make sure that all employees receive a copy of it and understand the main highlights of what's different within it. And then, you know, as laws change, we won't wait another 15 years to bring you edits and ask for your adoption of new versions of the handbook. So, any questions?
I think
Yes.
it goes back to the second or third slide that you showed. First of all, I want to thank both you and Kelsey for the tremendous amount of work that's gone into this project. Kelsey, welcome.
Thank you.
Quite a project for your
Yeah.
first few months here. And with all that hard work, one of the things under the background disclaimers was the town board reserves the right to interpret, change, modify, or eliminate any provision contained in the handbook.
Yes.
Can I assume that there's a process for that so that it doesn't become a capricious change?
So that language exists in the 2007 handbook, and it's essentially preserves for all future town boards their authority as voice of the voter to set town policy, right? So that someone can't argue that, well, you set the policy in 2007, so therefore you can never change it, all right? And it also provides management the opportunity to apply policies in ways that are fair and make sense as times change. You know, so it just is an ultimate recognition that the town board has the authority to set these policies by a vote of the town board.
So it would require a vote of the town.
To adopt policies, yes.
Thank you.
Any?
Thank you.
No.
Bill?
Not until I get a chance to go through it all.
Oh, boy.
Well,
That's really good.
there's a lot of cross-outs and a lot of additions, and I'd like to read through it.
And actually, I know we usually do, we don't do presentations usually at regular town board meetings, but Braden had said that based on the timeline, especially the training in December, to have this hit the ground running in January, as you saw in that last slide, it made sense to have it today so that we could adopt it hopefully by 2 weeks from tonight. All right. Well, thanks, Kelsey and Braden.
Thank you.